Viewers, on Converse, we look back upon the week's big story. This last week, viewers, India was collectively assaulted, I would say, visually, by visuals, disturbing visuals, from the United Kingdom, in particular Leicester and Birmingham. And those visuals you can see on your screens, viewers. In these pictures, you can see UK Hindus, or those Hindus that are living in the United Kingdom, in these particular cities, terrorized by Islamist thugs. Their temples surrounded, their physical persons under threat. Even though in India a section of the commentariat is pinning the blame on Hindus, there's now indisputable and growing evidence that it was Hindus who were in fact the victims of this assault. This assault, viewers, has even been raised in British Parliament by concerned MPs who believe that there is a very real danger now to Hindus living in the United Kingdom. There are a number of factors. We'll be discussing those factors with our guest today, but one might be the fact that the Hindu community has not only integrated, but is also very successful. This is true also of the United States. And therefore, perhaps, it's not surprising that the fact that Hindus are being singled out is not restricted just to the United Kingdom. As I said, even in America, where Indians and a majority of Hindus from among the Indian community have also become instrumental in shaping government policy or are the face of the Biden government and other several parts of the world, most notably in the subcontinent. Hindus are facing what amounts to existential threats. So why is this? Why is Hinduphobia going global? That's the fundamental question we are posing, and I want to open this up. And I want to ask a question first from Wasik, who's a counter-extremism expert, also a commentator who joins us from Britain. Mr. Wasik, what's going on? Why are we suddenly seeing this upsurge in crimes against Hindus, or are we just mistaken? Has this been happening, but perhaps not in this organized fashion, and therefore we're only waking up to it now?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of organized. So we know that Hindus have been a target of extremism for many years. We also know that the same is true with Muslims. But what we're seeing now, recently with Leicester, is that the organization of Islamist networks regionally, we know that people have traveled all the way from London to Leicester. We know people have traveled to Birmingham, to Leicester, to target Hindus specifically. And what they're disguising their targets as are Hindutva extremists or RSS extremists. And they're using these labels to target Hindus, unfortunately. And so they're conflating Hindutva, whether there is extremism there or not, that's a debate that we can have, of course, with law-abiding British Hindus. And unfortunately, we're seeing that this is now more of a regional thing, and it's not necessarily a national thing. It's not Pakistani Muslims or Indian Muslims against Indian Hindus. We're seeing also Muslims or Islamists, definitely, from other regions of the world, other ethnicities, who are also targeting Hindus. So I don't think it's just a nationalist issue. I think it's something deeper and something that we need to look into.
Okay, so here there are a large number of Indians who believe that this is happening because Hindus are copying resentment. Because in India now we have a Hindu nationalist government. That's what they claim. That is exporting Hindutva. And obviously that is threatening other denominations, specifically Muslims, in other parts of the world, as a result of which you have this backlash. Do you believe that this is a theory that stands up to scrutiny?
I'm not sure that it is. If we look at the diaspora of Muslims within Britain itself, we know that they enjoy freedom of religion. We know that they enjoy freedom of belief. In fact, that's one of the reasons why they hold up Britain to be such a good place to live, which is why we see lots of people migrating here. So they are not suffering from anything in terms of discrimination here. So I'm not entirely sure that we can, or anyone can actually posit the theory that what's happening in India is translating over here in terms of the Hindutva or even the BJP-led nationalist government and the so-called discrimination that's being targeted to minorities over there is happening over here, because we're in a completely different country here, and we can't be seen to be exporting issues over here, and claiming that we're now victims of what's happening over there, because clearly we're not.
Okay, so let me expand this. Dr. Anand Ranganathan, so at least Wasik, who lives there, has given us a very cogent reason to discount this theory. So why is this theory being propped up aggressively? And I'm talking about mainstream liberal intellectuals, so-called liberal intellectuals, in India, who are making these claims.
Hi, Rahul. First of all, liberal intellectual, the phrase itself is an oxymoron, but let's come back to the topic. Look, there are four issues here. Number one, first of all, I must say that I thank the Indian government for taking this up with the UK government and speaking up for the Hindus. It's a welcome change and it's high time. And this is not about interfering in the internal affairs of another government. Look, whenever our government has stood up for the Palestinian people, the Indian Muslims have applauded it, haven't it? The Indian Muslims want our government to stand up to China and criticize the internment of 1.5 million Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps. They are being fed pork. They've been forcibly sterilized. Uyghur Muslims. So shouldn't India talk about them? So this bunkum about let's not interfere in the internal affairs, I think that's just complete baloney. Number two, before I come to the UK, I want to look at Bangladesh, because I want to give you the scale of the problem. Because honestly speaking, Hindus are the new Jews worldwide. If you really want to be blunt about it, from 29.5% in 1931 to 9.5% in 2011, to what many census officials believe is less than 8% in 2019, might even be 6%. The Hindu population of Bangladesh, or erstwhile East Pakistan, has dwindled decade on decade. And to add to the misery, 11.3 million Hindus were forced to flee between 1964 and 2013. 2.4 million perished in the 1970-71 genocide. As many as 1.2 million Hindu families have been dispossessed of 2 million acres of land. 12.6 million is the current Hindu population of Bangladesh, and if the trend continues, there will be none left in 30 years. And the recent spate of that false Quran controversy, of terrible violence, rape, murder, looting, arson, temple destruction, it was a pointer, Rahul, to an ominous future for the Hindus there. Do we have to wait till we have to airlift the last Hindu from Bangladesh like we did from Afghanistan? What we don't realize is that Bangladesh and Pakistan will soon go the way of Afghanistan, and hopefully the UK won't. But one can't be sure the way things are panning out. Now let me come to number three, the UK. Rahul, the Islamists and their leftists and Darbari lapdogs try and get at Hinduism using the pretext of A, playing victim, both nationally and internationally, and B, targeting Hindutva and claiming it is distinct from Hinduism. Just note in all those clips we've been seeing over the last 3 or 4 days, how many times those Islamists, albeit Pakistani Muslims, mentioned the word Hindutva. It is a pre-planned strategy. And you remember the international support during the anti-CAA protests for all those hate-filled bigots blocking streets illegally for no rhyme or reason except to display a show of strength. All that, tera mera rishta kya, la ilaha illallah, Hinduon se azadi, kafiron se azadi, all that was for domestic Hindu militia that forms the core. And that is then very quickly transmitted internationally into all those worldwide global conferences saying we want to dismantle Hindutva. Now let me come to B very finally. All those who make a distinction between Hindutva and Hinduism so that they can criticize the former, I'm sorry, this is psychopathy topped up with profound ignorance, because Hindutva, I quote verbatim, means the Indian culture and not merely the Hindu religion, unquote. And this is the famous conclusion of the Supreme Court. But here is the thing. Even if you don't believe the Supreme Court, you're in your rights to not believe in. The Hindutva is the twa, or the essence of Hinduism, and means the Indian culture. If you don't believe it and you prescribe to it a political or social motive, even then Hindutva is not supremacist, but rather a defensive force to counter any attack on Hinduism. Tell me, is Hindutva responsible for 31,221 major terrorist strikes since 2001? Just because you are embarrassed by the violence, misogyny and bigotry commanded by the Holy Book, you bring in a false equivalence to deride Hindutva? Finally, Rahul, there have been, as you know, more than 50 or 60 arrests in the UK. But can you tell me how many Hindutva-wadis have been arrested for the recent UK violence? Zero.
Well, of course, we don't have full figures, but you're right, at least on the face of it, Dr. Ranganathan, what we know publicly, as of now, there is no evidence that any Hindutva-wadi, as you call them, have been arrested. So, yes, obviously, there are investigations that are still going on. But I just want once again to come back to Wasik. I'm going to quote to you a former member of the European Parliament, Martin Daubney. Now, Martin Daubney has been commenting on what's been going on, and he was also on the BBC a few days back, and he will be joining this broadcast shortly. But he says, so the BBC are making out the Muslim versus Hindu violence in Leicester is caused by check notes a cricket match. This utterly absurd state of delusion and denial doesn't help. It makes things worse. It's a politically correct, morally bankrupt charade. He goes on to say, Muslim mob rule on the streets of Britain as 200 men storm a Hindu center. The police soap these yobos. Where they'd stomp football fans, British society is disintegrating into religious sectarianism before our eyes. Now imagine, he says, if this was 200 white men storming a mosque. This would be global news. It's grotesque what's happening in Britain. The police cower and our cowardly media barely pass judgment. Now, he is railing against two towering British institutions, the police and the media, calling one cowering and the other one cowardly. Why would he be doing this? What's really happening here? Why are the police cowering? And who are they really cowering from? And why is the media cowardly?
Well, I don't agree with his analysis. I think when you're looking at police operations and having to deal with 200 men and you've only got around 8 police officers who are now having to deal with something that was unplanned, yes, and then having to manage that, as well as then a counter demonstration who's also comes out, and this is specifically in regards to Leicester, it becomes difficult to then, you can't just go ahead and arrest everyone because it will then go out of control. So you do have to think sensibly when dealing with a situation that you weren't privy to. Secondly, in terms of the media, I think I saw recently that a lot of the media have been raising the concern of Hindutva extremism and RSS extremism, and that's fine, you can do that, but what I haven't seen from the media is them raising the issue of Islamist extremism. And what we have seen is video evidence of Islamist extremists at these protests, galvanizing lots of these men to actually take up this cause and to frame it as a Muslim versus Hindu one. So I think his analysis is slightly skewed, because he's probably not aware of how police actually operate in hostile situations, okay, especially when it appears that they are under-resourced when these things take place. But you do agree with the fact that the media somehow gives this short shrift, at least one side
of the debate, which is Islamist extremism. Now, why, very quickly, in less than a minute, why is this allowance given?
I'm not sure why this allowance is given. What I do know is that whenever a terrorist attack takes place and it is a Muslim and they are therefore an Islamist extremism, defining them as Muslim becomes problematic because lots of people will claim that it is Islamophobia. You're obviously targeting the whole Muslim community, when that's obviously not the case. We all know there's a difference between Islam and Islamism, and this is something that we've been facing for the last 2 decades, and it doesn't look like.
So there is a self-censorship that goes on because you fear the backlash, you fear being called Islamophobic. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, Sushil Pandit, and Tehseen. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, why the self-censorship? No one seems to have a problem in calling out Hindutva hate or what have you, but there are suddenly bookends placed when it comes to the dialogue about Islamist extremism, whether in India or abroad. Why do you think this is happening?
Well, largely it has to do with the threat to life. You see, accusations of blasphemy, we've seen they resulted in 12 deaths in India about a month or so back. Similarly, what happens out here is there seems to be a disproportionate amount, just like in India, a disproportionate amount of street violence and a sort of a street veto by British Muslims, possibly a lot to do with being economically depressed in both countries. So, for example, even in India, there is a difference. When was the last time you saw Shia street violence in India? It doesn't really exist. It's entirely Sunni because the Shias are extremely well off. They're at the top of the economic ladder in India. Most of what you see in terms of street violence in India, overwhelmingly, is Sunni violence. Now, in Britain, what you have is Bangladeshis and Pakistanis at the absolute lower end of the economic rung. Now, let's go back to how this started off. It was basically Indian, allegedly started off, because remember, there's a lot of reports to show you that tension had been simmering in this area for the last 2, 3, almost 6 months, apparently, for whatever reasons. But in this particular case, a bunch of people marched through the street shouting Jai Shri Ram. Now, what's wrong with that? I think in any democratic country, you can go around walking around saying Jai Shri Ram or Allahu Akbar or may the blessings of our Lord in Christ be upon you. There's nothing wrong with that. Yet, what's happened is that this is seen somehow as a red flag to incite the sacrilege and desecration of Hindu sites. Why is that? You know, it is the same people today claiming that Hindus marching, shouting Jai Shri Ram is an assault and it is vicious Hindutvavadi, who during the rest of the year will claim that, you know, shouting Allahu Akbar and death to infidels is a perfectly legitimate form of political protest. What is worse is that you're seeing that a whole load of people are literally saying we need to do to them what we did to them in Kashmir, which is ethnically cleanse them. There is a chap called Muhammad Hijab who's gone around stoking up a lot of the crowds. And unfortunately, the Leicester police have played into this because they've been putting out a whole series of wrong information, which then they had to retract or clarify on several different occasions. Why is that? Now, understand, everybody here, whether we admit it or not, operates under the knowledge that you can pretty much say anything to a Hindu and get away with it. Precisely because of that street veto, you simply cannot say what you like about Islam or Muslims and get away with it. I think the more worrying aspect, of course, is what Wasik just raised, which is the state of the British police at the moment. You know, we are always taught that a third world country is one where the state does not have the monopoly on violence, and a supposed G7 first world country should have a monopoly on violence. And yet it turns out that British police have really not been able to control much of this, allowed it to escalate, in some cases significantly exacerbated it through misinformation. And this isn't the first time. If you remember, I think it was last year or last to last year, there were protests about outside the Indian High Commission, again instigated by the Pakistanis, where they attacked the Indian High Commission, damaged Indian High Commission property, and the police were just sitting around, knitting sweaters or twiddling their thumbs or drinking high tea with cucumber sandwiches or what have you.
Well,
so if you have a police force like that,
yeah,
would you really trust your safety and security to them?
Well,
so a level of self-censorship comes in.
Right. So that's actually a matter of deeper concern. Now, Mr. Poonawalla, do you agree with those who say that Jai Shri Ram is a war cry? It's the proverbial red rag to the otherwise peaceful minorities, whether here or abroad, etc., etc. Because that's what's been said. A large number of those who have justified the siege of the temples or their vandalism, etc., have said, oh, well, because these chaps were chanting Jai Shri Ram after a match and Vande Mataram, etc. All of this is part of the muscular Hindu supremacist grammar. And it means only one thing, that you're going after the other community.
So Namaskar Rahul, thank you for having me on the show. Namaskar to all my fellow panelists. At the beginning, let's just put a couple of things in perspective. And like Abhijit very rightly said about this hijab chap, Mohammed Hijab, he's of Egyptian descent. So I was hearing Wasik when he made his opening remarks. There seems to be some sort of an organized movement of Islamists against Indians. Let's not divide this between Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims, because Indian Muslims today are also suffering in Britain. They are stuck because there is pressure on them, and there is pressure on them as well to stand up and be counted, and they are standing with the Indian Hindu citizens. So first, this is an attack on all Indians. Indian Hindus and Muslims are absolutely united. There's been a lot of propaganda that has been put on your show, and I don't have time to rebut everything. But one thing, the Indian High Commission and the Indian Foreign Minister completely failed Indians out there. The Foreign Minister only took this up yesterday. Yes, I know that Anand said that the High Commission took up the matter earlier on, and kudos to them on that issue, but they were not forceful. They should have been right out there making sure that that Indians are protected. You remember when Indians in Australia were being attacked, it was immediately that the UP at the highest level pulled the strings. India only reacted yesterday, and I think that is unforgivable. The problem with the Indian government is not that, as Anand wrongly put it, that we are objecting to the Indian government standing up for Indians. They have to stand up. It first does like a TV-GV. First it will make noise on TV, it's propaganda on TV, and then do something substantial. And that is the problem with the Indian government. It acts first, reacts later, which should be actually the opposite in this situation. Even in Canada, I'm just slightly diverting, there was a referendum just 3 days ago, and the MP who Mr. Modi woos, the Conservative MP, has endorsed a referendum on Khalistan. That is how fail your Indian foreign policies. But let me come and put this across. This was simmering up since the India-Pakistan match that took place recently in England. This was the Pakistani community encouraging the other groups of Muslims from Egypt, from Syria, to attack the Indian community. Why did the High Commission not take note of that? These WhatsApps were coming across. To come out and say that Jai Shri Ram is a war cry is ridiculous in a country like England, where Wasik rightly says you have the right to propagate your...
This is important because, Mr. Poonawalla, you said that those who are making it about, you see, Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims,
yes,
they need to stop. A whole ecosystem here, it subscribes to what it says are universal liberal values. Who has come out and said that Hindutva is responsible? Now, if you're pinning the blame on Hindutva mobilization by the Modi government, which has now got this sort of international flavor, and that is what is sort of rattling Muslims, then you're obviously talking about the subcontinental Muslims and specifically Indian Muslims, isn't it? And you yourself are saying that there are, Egyptian Muslims, there is a whole larger, brotherhood, etc., that has come together. Why would they be bothered by some Hindutva consolidation? It's not happening in Egypt. It's certainly not happened in Bangladesh. It's not happening in Pakistan. So would you say that some of your own ideological bedfellows, these strange so-called liberals, the Latvian set, are actually misplaced, and they are deliberately fanning the flames of sectarianism?
you may blame the Lutyens lobby for it or whatever, car market
One
gang,
second, let's not
but
look
they're
at
not
it.
in power, Rahul.
No, one second.
They're not in power.
One second.
Let's call this out for what it is.
Because
let's call this out for what it is. 1 second, let me call this out. The problem with the Modi government is this. May I just call
let's
this
be
out?
a little honest tonight.
Yes.
You can keep shifting the goalpost in this debate. No, then you need to come out and say that my fellow liberals who are trying to mischievously make this about Hindutva, which is only restricted to the Indian context, are wrong. And they are deliberately trying to drive a wedge between communities here in India and scoring points against the Modi government and trying to suggest that it's Modi that is somehow wrecking India's image internationally.
He is wrecking India's image internationally. There is no doubt about it. And let me put it across to you why. Okay. Let's give you 3 specific examples. Mr. Modi loves to bring foreign policy into domestic policy. And that's the first cardinal mistake in policy.
But this
Your foreign
domestic
policy should not be brought into domestic.
This is a domestic issue. It's
got
nothing to do with foreign politics.
For his domestic politics, he brings it forward. He tries to bring in fake foreign policy achievements which do not exist. Let's come to a specific issue about CA that Anand Ranganathan raised. I challenge CA in court. I think it's against the constitution. There were people who had blocked the street. Why did the Home Ministry under Mr. Modi not pull out those protesters until the Supreme Court came down? So this is a man and a government which has a weak domestic policy.
Because your bedfellow said, one second, because your bed, one second.
Am I running the country?
One second, Mr. Poonawalla, don't become the nationalist that you're not. So let us get to the point. One second, please, just 1 second. Don't suddenly become a BJP man.
I am not a BJP man.
Listen to me.
Anti-BJP.
Listen to me. Don't become the Trojan horse that you're not. So let's not be too clever here by half. Let us ask the most basic question here, please.
Can I very quickly come in?
Okay. Doctor. Go ahead.
Yes,
but allow me to rebut you, doctor.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, absolutely.
And also, doctor, just one fact check. You were wrong on the Bangladesh population, but that's for another date.
Tehseen said 4 things. He is, what is the expression? He is hunting with the hounds and running with the hare. Out of those 4 things, I applaud Tehseen that 2 things that he said, they're worth applause. Number 1, that he said Jai Shri Ram is not a provocative slogan. That's good. Thank you for saying that. Number 2, he applauded the Indian government for stepping in, irrespective of the fact that many from his, I hesitate to use the word ilk because that will be wrong, from his party and from that ecosystem have even criticized the government for even talking about this. But where Tehseen is wrong are on 2 things. Number 1, when he gives a blank check to the Indian Muslims and says this is the doing of the international Egyptian or something, can I ask him?
Yeah.
Who threw the Hindus out of Kashmir? Were they Egyptian Muslims? Can I ask him? Who was the one who poured on in their lakhs on the streets demanding Sar Tan Se Juda for Nupur? Who killed Kanhaiya Lal? They are all Indian Muslims. I'm sorry, Tehseen, much as you would like to say, much as I would like to believe that Indian Muslims have no hand in this, you only have to watch Rahul's debates over the last 2 days, where Indian Muslims have refused to criticize this and have sided with the Pakistani Muslims. Ask Rahul.
Okay, may I please?
1 second. Let me just step in here. Yeah, of course. Just give me 30 seconds. Yeah. It's very important, viewers, that we understand what is going on. Now, no one here is implying that there are in any way Indian Muslims in the UK that were part of this mob, because we don't have the proof. We've only seen balaclava wearing men, masked men, spewing profanities against Hindus. One would imagine that no Indian Muslim would be standing amongst that lot. That having been said, it is surprising, though, Tehseen Poonawalla, that we don't have a bunch of people who have appeared on this show taking a definitive position against the bullying, the siege of Hindu temples, and the terrorizing through verbal intimidation of others who don't even live in Leicester and Birmingham.
As Wasik put it very articulately, people from London, people from other parts of UK, not just England, came to this place to create violence. So, yes, as Abhijit said,
and I'm not going to pull my punches. Your ilk, Your
It's not
ilk
my ilk.
sits and blames Hindutwas.
Who's blaming Hindutwas? There is
Extremists.
I am blaming the government of India. They should have been proactive. You can say that I am a Khan market lobby, I'm a Lucian's lobby, whatever terms you want to tell me. But Rahul, I am not in power. When I was in power in Australia and Indians were attacked in Australia, I stood up and made the Australian Prime Minister take note. Did the British Prime Minister take note?
So here we go. So here we go, viewers. This is a very convenient argument. It happens in Rajasthan. Under the Rajasthan Chief Minister, Modi is to blame. If it happens in UK, Modi is to blame. If it happens in Timbuktu, Modi is to blame. I don't think that Modi was the Prime Minister of the world, but maybe as you taunt him by calling him Vishwaguru, you're conceding that point. Nonetheless, let me move on. Okay, let me move on. No, hang on. Vishwaguru. Okay, so now let me tell you, viewers.
Why did Modi not take it
Your
up?
Prime Minister also sat down, sir, and gave a portion of our country away to Pakistan by making a gaffe at Sharm el-Sheikh. So I don't want to. So I don't want to. No, 1 second. So I don't want to get into this.
Let's not get into it.
1 second. No, I don't want to. I don't want to because you're digressing. You're deliberately throwing out.
You brought up Sharm el-Sheikh, sir.
Look, Tehseen, you're deliberately trying to evade the answer.
I am saying ultimately
you
who's
are
responsible
because
for
of your
security
selective silence on what your ilk. 1 second. What your ilk are doing. Sorry. Quote unquote. Again, you're just badgering me.
I refuse this terminology.
You're badgering me.
I am standing up for Indians.
You're not a liberal. Are you not a liberal? Are you not a liberal? Are you a liberal?
I'm absolutely a liberal.
So I'm saying your ilk from that point of view, a liberal ilk. Okay.
So you're saying that the Prime Minister is not a liberal?
He is.
You're not a liberal?
He is. That's why I am too. So I'm saying.
So are you part of this ilk?
Yes. Why are you getting defensive?
No, I'm just asking you.
No, I'm only saying. Why are you wanting to excommunicate yourself from me?
I'm not. I'm asking you. You're also
I'm asking you, but I don't have that point of view. So I don't have your point of view. I don't share your point of view. So I'm asking you. You blame them. You go out there and you blame them and you say that don't make this about Indian Hindus and Indian Muslims. But they are raking up Hindutva. What has Hindutva got to do with someone from Egypt? Tell me.
But all of this hate started in August with the India-Pakistan matches.
It didn't, sir.
And
you've heard Vasik saying to us. You've heard Vasik saying to us. It's been building up for years altogether. And a trigger. No, he said. Don't misquote him. Don't misquote him. Here is Martin Dobney. Here are several other people who've come out and said that this has been happening now for ages. It just all came together in organized. It all happened together. Have you been there to see every crime that has been committed? No, it's been happening, and I can show you a list. I can show you a list. Now the British police has failed. You see, viewers, we will constantly find scapegoats on this channel because certain people will blame the British police, they'll blame Modi, they'll blame this, they'll want to sound self-righteous, but they will never come out and condemn the real problem, which is politics. A vicious politics that is aimed at dividing Indians. Sushil Pandit, it's important that we set the record straight and call out those who are making this Indian Hindu versus Indian Pakistani, Indian Hindu versus Indian Muslim problem.
No, I don't know. I don't have a way to find out whether there were Indian Muslims involved on this side or that side. But what is necessary to be called out here, I may agree a lot with Abhijit, but on the economic angle, I think it's a red herring. When you say that Sunnis are poor and therefore they are more prone to violence, this is like some kind of a rationalization. I find a lot of Hindus much poorer than Sunni Muslims in different parts of India and elsewhere. They are not prone to violence. And in Kashmir, we were turned out by a 90% Sunni population, which probably is the most prosperous section of Indian population with highest per capita ownership of car anywhere in the country. It is in Kashmir Valley. And yet they turned us out. There is no homelessness in Kashmir Valley. You can't find one homeless person in entire valley, and yet they turned us out. Much, not at all due to economic reasons, there's something else. And that is what we need to confront. That something else has now been brewing in UK for decades. This radicalization sees no national boundaries or nationality boundaries, whether it is Somalian Muslims or Caribbean Muslims, or Pakistani Muslims, or Bangladeshi Muslims, or Syrian Muslims. The only exception is Afghan Muslims, who are a lot more peaceful and well-behaved. Rest, let me tell you, have been found working together. In Leicester, the match that we are referring to was 28th of August, as late as that. And the violence erupted on 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of September, when Hindu homes were targeted, when people were targeted in cars where they could find Hindu symbols, when people were targeted on streets. Indian embassy reacted barely a couple of days back, I think on 21st.
Yeah.
It has taken more than 20 days for people to respond.
Yeah.
And this was an organized program. You had people being called saying brothers are needed in Leicester because they are going to attack a masjid.
Yeah.
These are the kind of calls, and these are not calls to Bangladeshi Muslims or Pakistani Muslims. Brothers is the Brotherhood of Islam. And they were targeting Hindus. You may want to know why. Chances are because Hindus and India are coterminous. Both are getting more and more prosperous, visible, and earning respect. They don't live on state support in UK or in US or anywhere else. They work hard, they pay taxes, they are peaceful. The proportion of Hindu population in prison is in decimal places compared to their proportion in population. Whereas the proportion of Muslim prisoners in UK prison is more than 4 times. More than 4 times their proportion of population in the UK population. So this shows the level of violence, the level of lawlessness prevalent in a certain section. And why do police and why do the authorities turn a blind eye? Just for the same reasons as they do in India. They want to buy peace. They want to appease. They want to make concessions in the hope that they'll turn more peaceful. That's the only reason. Police is far outnumbered compared to the job at hand. They are thin. There's very little recruitment happening, and they turn a blind eye to most of the cases because they can't spend time on it. They can't spend time on investigating or preventing or policing the streets.
Right.
So they try and buy peace. They try and somehow appease those who are prone to violence in the hope that they will therefore curb violence or keep it down. No other reason. And this kind of appeasement is only going to feed violence because it emboldens them, because they know that they are a law unto themselves. And it is happening everywhere in Britain, including Birmingham and London. There are ghettos where you have street signs saying you are entering Sharia zone. And police dare not enter there for regular policing and patrolling. Such is the case. And politicians are happily collaborating in it. Claudia Webb, who's a Labour MP from East Leicester, has been seen almost rationalizing it. She is blaming the victims there, the Hindus. The Leicester Council has more, out of 52, has 50 Labour councillors. It is an overwhelming majority. There is a huge political skew in the UK, in the discourse prevailing in UK. Though conservatives are in power, but there are certain centres where political and policing equations have turned against Hindus. And that is alarming. Now, you may gloat over the fact that there are no Hindu arrests, but the way indiscriminate police cases are being filed against Hindu youths in order to just balance it out, it's a matter of time. And that is a real threat.
Okay. If a Hindu says, Jai Shri Ram, it's a war cry. If, I'm sorry to say this, viewers, if the Lashkar-e-Toiba says Ghazwa-e-Hind, then it has nothing to do with anything. It is just some, made up something or the other. It's not a war cry. So how do you see this, Dr. Ranganathan?
No, I'm afraid, much as a good friend as Tehseen is of mine, is in quicksand right now, because look at the Tehseen, please let me. You see, Rahul is absolutely right that those terror organizations use this phrase Ghazwa-e-Hind.
Yes.
When they use it, you say it doesn't exist. When I quote to you authentic verses of the Quran that the ISIS follow, you say that is also not true. One of those two things have to be true, my friend. So when Quran says those who deny the Quran, their necks will be shackled. When Quran says polytheists are the worst of creatures. When Quran says fight against those who do not believe in Allah and who do not adopt Islam, fight them until they give the jizya while they are humble. When they say do not marry the polytheist women. When it says do not forget that disbelievers are allies of one another. When it says do not make disbelievers guardians. You deny all that as well. You bring in the context or whataboutery or that I, a kafir, cannot quote the verses. So one of those two things you have to accept. What
Today, Tehseen Poonawalla, in our own courts,
Sure.
lawyers that are appearing for those who want to impose the hijab are saying that it's in our holy book. They're saying it.
And they're right.
Now, please allow me to put everything in perspective. There is interpretations of the Quran which happens time after time after time after time. If you want to quote some imam or some Maulana who comes and makes the most conservative interpretation, like somebody would interpret the Manusmriti conservatively, I leave that to you. That's your choice. But that's not the interpretation of the Quran. Ghazwa-e-Hind is a fake quote hadith attributed to the Prophet. Please allow me to finish. Please allow me to finish. Please allow me to finish. The first, one second. Come on, Anand. The first,
why are you shouting? Calm down. Lower your tone. Calm down.
The first word in the Quran is Ikra. It means to study, to get educated, to read. The Prophet asked people to get educated when Islam was started.
Okay, viewers, look, I'm running out of time now. We've gone down some rabbit holes here. Viewers, it's very simple. We have a situation where some of us are in grave denial about what is going on. This reminds me of what happened also in Kashmir to some extent. Till the storm did not blow people over, we refused to see it. And even now, we don't want to acknowledge it. So Tehseen has made 4 points, and I don't want to pick on him or single him out. He made 4 points, viewers, tonight. Number one, that those who are trying to make this a Indian Hindu-Muslim issue are wrong, but he refuses to criticize those from within his community of ideological allies who do so. He digresses and puts the blame on the executive authorities in this country. Number two, he comes out and says that this is not being done at an organized level because no one has a pathological problem with the UK British Hindu community. Yet he says that Egyptians have showed up there, that people from other Islamic countries are there in hectoring the Hindus. How does that stand, viewers, if they didn't actually have a problem with Hindus or with any outsider? 3, he goes on to say, viewers, very blithely, that this was just an India-Pakistan match, clearly ignoring a whole raft of crimes that have been perpetrated by a large number of Islamists in Britain. They've even carried out, viewers, terror attacks, the train bombings. He forgets the radicalization. A large number of UK citizens who were Muslims even joined ISIS ranks, even women. I want to bring the last and the foremost point that he made. And I find that striking because he said at a fundamental level, in India, you have a bunch of people who use a political slogan to target minorities. I would then feel, viewers, that this kind of comment gives the rationale for those who are carrying out attacks on foreign soil, foreigners, foreign Muslims, not Indian Muslims, on Hindus. Do you think, viewers, Pakistanis need an excuse to target Indian Hindus anywhere in the world? They don't. Viewers, they have been waging a proxy war with the intent of chopping us up into 1,000 pieces, Hindus and Muslims alike. These are very important issues to discuss. And they cannot be blithely brushed aside by pinning the blame on one community. Let's hope that we don't go down that route. Because the moment you start doing so, viewers, you're going to breed more resentment, and that's going to be problematic. I leave it at that. I leave it at that.